Hey gang, Tabetha here with another episode of Tabetha's Art Tips. So I heard from some of my students that they are a little bit confused about paintbrushes and what you can do with them and when to use what brush. And I've definitely got some ideas on that, but I want to start by saying that there isn't a wrong way to do this or a right way to do this. There's not a right brush or a wrong brush. There's only brushes that work for you. So I will tell you what works for me, why I use them, when I use them, and we'll go from there. And there will actually be several videos in this series because I don't want to throw a bunch of information out there all at once on a super long video, so we're just going to start with flat brushes, which basically are these guys. There's also brushes called bright brushes, which I don't tend to use. They're like the flats but with shorter bristles, and those are great. I do use them sometimes. I don't have any handy because I don't use them that often, but they're great. You have more control and they're really good when you want to paint with thicker paint. But for now I'm going to talk about flats. So the first thing to know about me is that I am not a paintbrush snob. I use cheap paintbrushes. I use whatever works. And you can find good cheap paintbrushes and bad cheap paintbrushes, and even from the same brand. This is an Artist Loft brush, which is not bad. And then you can also have this one, which they were giving away free with canvases, and it's, I don't want to say it's crap, because it is good for certain things, but for most of the painting that I want to do, it is not very good for. It's very scratchy and will make interesting texture, good for dry brushing, good for splattering paint, but it's not an everyday brush for me. This is a good brush for me. This is the flat brush I call the workhorse of the brushes. I believe the invention of the flat brush is what made the Impressionists able to get out there and paint, because they were able to get a lot of paint down in a very short amount of time. So I just dipped my brush in a little bit of water to get it wet, and then wiped it off a little bit on my canvas here, my table. And that's always a good way to start. You don't want to start generally with a paintbrush that's too dry. So this guy, you'll see I've got, well, it's mostly loaded on one side, but it's great for covering an area pretty quickly. And what I do is I use this sweeping brush stroke back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I think I want to add a little color into there, because why not? Okay, so I adjusted my setup a little bit so you can see what I'm doing with the water here, because this is important when you're working with acrylics. So earlier what I was saying is that I dip my brush into the water, I wipe it off a bit on my towel, and then I go into the paint. And here I'm just going to pick up some magenta. I like to mix like this on the canvas because it gives me interesting textures. And every once in a while I just wet my brush again to keep that paint flowing. So yeah, this flat brush will cover a large surface in a short amount of time. It's great for doing backgrounds, great for warming up. Just getting some paint on the canvas. And when you notice yourself running out of paint like that, unless that's the effect you want, it can be a really cool dry brush effect. But if you want to cover the whole thing, pick up more paint, just reload that brush and keep going back in there. All right, so that's one thing. That's one thing that the flat brush is good for. Now, when I say that it's good for covering large areas quickly, I do mean a decent size flat. This is an Artist Loft 11, an Artist Loft 11. Now, it does vary from brand to brand. I find that different brands size their brushes differently. This is a 9. This is a 3. And they even go smaller. But these are great for not just covering a canvas quickly, but also for making straight lines. For instance, if you wanted to go in and paint a horizon line, and I'm not actually trying to paint anything here, so don't expect some amazing painting at the end of this. I'm just playing with colors. And I encourage you to do the same. You know, get out your flat brush and play around, see what it can do. But yeah, it's great for making a straight line, just pulling that paint right across. If you're painting man-made objects, buildings, even clouds. I like to do windswept clouds with the flat brush. So what I'm doing is I'm just using the edge. So you can use the broad side and get a broad, wide stroke, or you can use the thin side and get a thinner stroke. So I'm using that thin side and just sweeping back and forth. And then sometimes I use the broad side. And honestly, it's so fun to just play with paint. But if you just do this back and forth, especially if you're going horizontally, you'll end up with some nice wind-swept clouds. Just don't overthink it. And again, I'm not here to demonstrate cloud making, just what you can do with it. And actually, you can do some clouds coming off of the horizon if you want. You can do some dashes, just grabbing gobs of paint and picking your brush up and sort of skipping it across the sky. And there's so much more you can do with a flat brush. Sometimes I even do grasses. So let's try that. So for this technique, I'm just going to get a little bit of paint on the edge of the brush. I don't even know if this is going to work. I haven't done it in a while. Let's try it out. So I'm going to line up the edge of the brush with the bottom of the canvas, and I'm going to put the brush there, and I'm going to pull up. Get some white in there. And this is almost, I'm almost flicking at the end of the brush stroke. I'm definitely lifting up at the end of the brush stroke. Now, are these the best grasses ever? No, but it's an effect you can get with this brush. And you can use the skinny side and have a little bit more control over what's happening here. And there are better brushes for this, but it's something you can do. If you find yourself with just a big flat brush, this is one of the things you can do with it. And you can always do some background grasses like this and then go in with smaller brushes and do more detailed grasses. This might be your first layer of grasses. And the key really is to just experiment. Play around with it. Don't have any expectations. Don't worry about a thing. Just know that it is just practice. And you can always paint back over this canvas if you're using acrylics. And it's actually not a bad idea to challenge yourself to do an entire painting using one brush, particularly a big brush, because you'll really improve your brush skills if you do that. Alright, so that's the large flat brush, I think it was an 11. Here's the 3. Let's see what we can do with that. Now, not all brushes are created equal, and they'll be different after use. So this is kind of a well-used brush. It's fluffy, it's soft, it's good for blending. This is a little stiffer, which would be better for lines, not quite as good for blending. And if I'm buying brushes in person, if you go to an art supply store and buy brushes and they're sitting in a bin, I always just take them out and bounce them. I bounce them on my hand and see what the give is. And you might have to try a lot of paintbrushes to see what you like. You know, I'm always a fan of just getting a variety and trying them out. Get some hard brushes, some soft brushes, some different shapes and sizes, and see what you like. Alright, so I'm just going to go straight into this deep green, and I'm not getting a ton on there. Just a little gob. And I'm going to turn it sideways and flick up. And if you don't get the result you want, try adding a little water. See if that helps. Or try drying your brush off and see if that helps. But yeah, you can do these basic blades of grass just by flicking. Flick, flick. Of course, if I were painting, you know, an actual painting rather than just practicing, I would have different colors. I'd go in with some yellows with this green or some blues. Get different shades in there. But for now, this is just kind of fun. Don't forget about your water Experiment with using more water, with less water. It's all about experimentation. I'm going to pick up my number 9. And I'm going to mix my magenta with my green. And what's really great about these flat brushes is if you could have a variety of sizes, and you know how wide you want something to be, like for instance a tree trunk, you can choose the right size brush. Now look how thin that paint is. This would take a couple of layers to get through this. So you can go up and then turn your brush sideways to get a thinner line to do that branch. I really like not switching brushes. I like using the same brush when I can for a painting. I'm kind of a lazy painter that way, I guess. But being a lazy painter really kind of allows you to develop skills, helps you to develop skills with the one paintbrush when you're not picking up other paintbrushes every 5 minutes. Now since this paint is so thin, I'm going to add some white to thicken it up a little bit. It's driving me nuts. When in doubt, throw some white in there, see what happens. Now after a while, it just makes sense to switch paintbrushes. So I will switch to a smaller flat. See, I can get a little bit more detail with that smaller brush. And when you're using the bigger brush, sometimes it just, the opportunity for error is bigger when you're using a bigger brush. So I encourage you to definitely try an entire painting with a big flat brush, but just think of it as practice. Because sometimes you really learn well by learning what can go wrong. And it's better to learn that in a painting that you don't care about so much. Alright, that's it. I've really got to stop painting. That's what I've got as far as the flat brush goes. I've had a lot of fun doing this, and like I said, I wasn't trying to do an actual painting, but I might have to work this some more and lower this horizon. I don't know. We'll see. If you use a flat brush and you do some different things with it, let me know in the comments. I want to know how you're using your flat brush. And tune in next time where I will talk about, I think I'll probably talk about a round brush. I like a nice round brush. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more art tips and tutorials.